Hi, welcome to the Medicare Show. I'm your host and Medicare advisor, Jeffrey Kuhn. Just finished up a podcast on people that are considering, or still working, I should say, and they're approaching 65. Should you get Medicare, should you not? This podcast is going to be geared more towards the people that are post 65, have been on employer group plan coverage, and they're looking at retiring. Some key things that you want to know. The reason I'm doing this podcast as well is I've had a number of calls and people are getting misinformed by people they work with, their friends. And I want to clarify a couple really important details that people are really overlooking. When you are working under an employer group health plan each year, you want to make sure that you're getting a letter that states if you've got credible coverage or not. They send it out every year. You've got different rules with Medicare as what their standards are and what their requirements are. More specifically, they care about Part D. You've got to have coverage that's at least as good as Medicare. Now, there's a lot of people that have Medicare Part B, and there's a lot of people that aren't required to have Medicare Part B by their employer. So they're transitioning onto Medicare Part B, and that's where I see a lot of issues are the folks that don't have Medicare Part B yet, and they're looking at retiring. You could be subject to penalties, both for Part D and Part B, if you don't play this right when you turn 65. So the first thing that you want to know is you're looking at retiring. I just had this conversation yesterday. Do you have a high deductible plan? And again, I mentioned this in a prior video, but people really don't understand what high deductible means. If you have a health savings account available to you that you can put money away pre-tax that comes out tax-free for any qualified medical expenses, that typically means you've got a high deductible plan. And if you don't have first dollar coverage, there's certain limits to what that high deductible, dollar amount is and it changes, that qualifies you for tax deductible contributions. But typically, if you've got something like that, I'm going to tell you it's not considered credible coverage. So as you get closer to retirement, people are not allowed to contribute. And you look at Medicare.gov, they'll tell you 6 months out, you shouldn't be contributing, can't contribute to an HSA or when you're on Medicare for that matter, because you don't qualify essentially for a health savings account. So you want to be careful about that as you approach your retirement date. There is a form of verification that your employer is going to have to sign that you've had credible coverage. Now, if you've got a high deductible plan or your plan isn't as good as Medicare, technically you haven't had what Medicare considers credible coverage. So you could be subject to both a Part B penalty for not having Part B and Part D for not having credible drug coverage. These penalties can last a lifetime. Part D, certainly if you could assess this and you're not in the right type of coverage. So a lot of people make mistakes and don't get in the right insurance prior to retirement. Now you can change your insurance plan during open enrollment. If you've been in a high deductible plan, get yourself into what's considered credible coverage. As you transition off retirement, your employer obviously will sign off and say you've had credible coverage from these dates. You can enroll in Part B anytime you want. Well, I shouldn't say anytime, but you can retire anytime and pick up Part B. It's a qualifying event, as well as making sure you have Part D or credible drug coverage. So a couple of things that happens with people when they retire. I've seen this. If you've got a spouse that's covered under your group health plan that's not 65, this is where a lot of mistakes happen. People say, I'm going to extend my COBRA and stay under COBRA, not pick up Part B. I mean, I've seen somebody I don't know how they did this, but they paid for their own individual health insurance for 2 years, had their spouse on there, they'd retire, they were over 65. Now, they're limited to being able to apply for Medicare Part B only during January, February, and March. That's it. And they're going to get penalties for not having Part B, and they're also going to get penalties for not having Part D. So a couple things you want to keep in mind date-wise. The first trigger is at 63 days. If you go over 63 days without credible coverage, Medicare starts assessing a penalty for Part D. You could be subject to pre-existing. You could be subject to underwriting, depending on the states that you live in. and the other date is 8 months. After you've separated, you've retired, you've got 8 months for a special election period of a qualifying event because you've retired to get enrolled into some sort of plan. So you don't want to miss that because then you could be waiting for the annual election period and you may not have coverage till January. But the biggest thing you want to be careful with is you're not coming off of a plan that's not considered credible coverage by Medicare and transitioning on to Medicare. Because let's say in July 1st, you're retiring. You're going to want to apply for Medicare no later than June 1st. You're going to get a form verification for your employer to sign that you've had credible coverage. Social Security is going to need that as proof. Now, this does get audited periodically. They're going to make sure that, yes, you've had credible coverage. And then you can sign up for Part B without a penalty and get yourself some form of Part D coverage, whether it's included in an Advantage plan or you're going to stay on original Medicare, pick up a supplemental and a standalone Part D plan. So you don't want to make these mistakes. I've seen more people that have carried their spouse. They've not had Medicare, and now they've gotten both Part B. They've gotten a Part D penalty. I've seen couples that have both been on Medicare that this happened to. They waited too long. So you want to get all your ducks in a row as you're retiring. And you definitely want to work with a professional to make sure that you've got the right coverage, you've got everything you need. Timing-wise, this is set up right, that you're going to roll on to Medicare and not have any issues and get everything done in time, because it is sometimes a cumbersome process and you don't want to make mistakes. So get the information. Don't get it from your friends, because I'm going to tell you most of the time I see that information is wrong. If you've got questions, again, feel free to reach out to me. Numbers below, emails below. You can certainly comment on the video. And if you know anybody that's going to be retiring that this might be helpful to get them thinking about things, by all means, share this with them. And I appreciate you liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.